Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another edition of the Liberia History Channel. My name is Dennis Jar, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. In tonight's edition of the Liberia History Channel, we are going to be continuing our series on the presidents of Liberia. We've dealt with Joseph Jenkins Roberts, Stephen Allen Benson, Daniel B. Warner, Edward James Roy. So tonight we're going to be dealing with James Smith. That's James Skivring Smith. That's the person, that's the president we're going to be dealing with tonight. So we want to welcome all of you to focus on Liberia. Invite a friend, share the show, and let us dive into Liberian history. Of course, the presenter is Ko Yeya. And to all the Liberian people, we say Imano Kanu Yola. Welcome. Ko, welcome to the show.
It's always my pleasure to be here to discuss one of my favorite subjects, which is Liberian history.
It's always a pleasure to discuss Liberian history, and who can better do this than a student of history, Carl family. Carl, I'm excited that we are here, and I want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. This is our own little contribution. We've dealt with other presidents. This time is Mr. James Skivring Smith. And I was fortunate to speak with someone who is from the family line of James Smith, and I hope he's watching tonight. That's my friend Kenny Smith, who should be the great-great-grandson or the great-great-great-grandson of the president. So I'm having Kevin, if you are watching, thanks for coming. And if you are in any way related to any of our presidents or those that we are discussing, and you have some family records, please join the show and let us discuss. Carl is James Smith.
Yes. Very interesting person. Shortest serving president to date. He only served for about 2 months, a little less than 2 months, and very interesting, very interesting. Dr. James Skivring Smith, MD. He's a medical doctor.
Carl, look at your audio a little bit.
Oh, is it not working well?
Okay. I think it was kind of a little low.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there's a little grinding sound in the background. So let me take a short break while you do some adjustment. And while we go on this break, we've been discussing the Liberian presidents, and we talk about some of their coloration in their pictures as time goes by. So while Carl is making the adjustment there, let me show some of our presidents. We started with President Joseph Jenkins Roberts, a mulatto, and mixed. And we also see President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, our recent president, also mixed. So it is not uncommon to have mixed. But there are some presidents who they were not really mixed, but we have them, some of their pictures, they appear like mixed. Example, Daniel B. Warner. And you can see the picture on the left. He appears as a mulatto or mixed. And then on the right, that's the real self. We also see President Edward James Roy, who the picture on the left appears like he's mixed. We also see President Arthur Barkley. The picture on the left is an actual picture, and then the one on the right appears that he's mixed. Also, President William D. Coleman, same story. And so last week we kind of talked a little bit about that. This week we are not talking about that. We are talking about Dr. James Skivring Smith, the medical doctor who happens to be the 6th president of Liberia, November 4, 1871 to January 1, 1872. Carl, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. So is my volume a little bit better?
Yeah, it's a little bit better, but when you are talking, there's some scratchy or grinding sound in the background.
Uh-oh. I'm not sure how to fix that. Is it bearable?
All right. Is the microphone somewhere? Because it's like somewhere when you are turning it, I hear you better.
Interesting. So it's just it's on the device, and
okay, I think it's manageable.
Okay. So basically, we're going to be discussing Dr. James Skivring Smith, MD, medical doctor, who immigrated to Liberia on the ship Hercules in 1833 at about the age of 8. Dennis, can you hear me? Now I can't hear you.
I'm still hearing the background noise. There's like ruffling papers in the background or some uh, uh, audience. If you are hearing that same sound, please, or if it is me, please give me a signal. And yeah, here's the family member I'm talking about, Kenneth Smith, is online. So Kenneth, welcome. Let's talk about.
Is he hearing me? Could you have the audience test the audio? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, audience, if you can hear call very well without that sound, please let us know. All right.
Okay, so she's saying yes. She's hearing like sand. Okay. Um, let's Dennis, if you want to take over and just kind of do the first slide, I'm going to switch the device and see if I can come back on. Okay.
All right.
All right. Thanks.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will take another short commercial or short break. It's not commercial. We will take a short break and we will be right back. Hmm. Welcome back while we wait for call to come back. But I want to hear your opinion. I want to hear feedback from you concerning what we're doing here, the presidents of Liberia. What did you know about this president prior to listening to the Liberia History Channel? Today we are on James Skivring Smith. So if you know anything about James Smith, please put that in the comment section. If you know anything about James Smith, please put that. What I remember is at some point we didn't remember, or we didn't probably include him as one of the presidents. So when I was in elementary school and we're doing the presidents, I remember President Tubman was the 18th president, and President Todber was the 19th. So that's what, because I believe James Skirvin Smith was left out. Why? We're going to study that tonight. We also know that when President Weah took office, there were some controversies as to whether he was the 25th president or the 26th president or the 24th president. So that's what, and so it took some Liberian historians to come out and say, no, this is because James Skirvin Smith was not included. Some people, even up to today, have not been able to include President Moses Blah, who came after President Taylor, as one of our presidents because the term was very short. So we're going to be looking at all these. And also, there has been some also talk as to the coloration of the images of these presidents after they passed. Some were who are dark skinned, but after some time, according to Call, this happened around 1952 when they started painting them white or mixed or mulatto or fair skin. Most of these pictures came from STEM. So these are why we are here. Keep supporting the Liberia History Channel. On the Liberia History Channel, we do a lot of history stuff. This time we are on a series of the presidents of Liberia, from Joseph Jenkins Roberts to George Mane Weah. So what we're doing is we're going to go all the way to President Barclay, Edwin Barclay, and then because from Tubman to now, they've been discussed extensively. So we may not be able to cover Tubman as from Tubman to present, as most of us know. All right. Let's see what Carl has for us.
I don't know.
Welcome.
This is it. This is what I've got. So if y'all can't hear me, then that's it.
All
Is that
right.
decent?
Okay. Say something again. Let me mute myself.
Hello, testing.
Okay, that sounds better.
Okay. All right. So let's go. Let's. I think we should just dive right into the slide because it's 27
Okay.
after.
All right. So Dr. James Curvin Smith is a medical doctor. That's why we say doctor. The sixth president of Liberia, November 4, 1871 to January 1, 1872.
Yes. So I'm going to do what I always do. I'm going to go over kind of his biographical sketch, talk about his background, the circumstances under which he was born, what I was able to find. So Smith was born in Charleston. So the conventional history has it that he was born in Charleston, South Carolina in the year 1825. Month and day unknown. And he was born to a family of, in some sources it says free blacks, other sources it says liberated Africans. And we've discussed extensively the difference between the two. He is described in ACS documents and as well as church documents as what they called a full-blooded African, meaning that his parents were of unmixed African ancestry. So the reason I'm not sure if he was born, when I say free blacks, I mean Africans who had been employed or enslaved on plantations, who were then liberated. That would be freed blacks. Liberated Africans would be those liberated from slave ships that never served the dehumanization of having worked on plantations, but they were really not much more liberated than those who were actually enslaved. So we're going to talk a little bit about the demographics of Charleston, South Carolina at the time. I did go through the census papers from around the time period that he was born. I didn't go too far back, but I went from about 1810 to about 1828. And so we're going to talk about what the census papers had to say and so on. But the sketch you see in the background is what Charleston would have looked like um, around 1910. So that is not around the time he was born. Just wanted to clarify
Right. And I love Charleston. The food in Charleston is very good.
that. Yes, they do have very good food. And there's a big connection between Charleston, South Carolina. In fact, the whole eastern seacoast islands and Liberia, Sierra Leone, a huge Liberia, Guinea, Sierra Leone. So a lot of our forefathers from the Mono River Union, the part of the United States, because we were avid in historic rice farmers. So the places that we were typically brought into chattel slavery when we would be captured would be South Carolina, Georgia seacoast islands, and those places where they had the massive rice plantations. And so many of those African Americans on the southern eastern islands of the United States are, and the coastal states of the United States are descendants of the what we call the Green Coast or Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea area.
Hmm.
So we do have a kinship with them. That's probably why you enjoy the food.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about the 1820 census. Was very telling. The 1820 census, the reason this is important is because I always try to find out who these people were and why were they leaving. Whatever, there's a plantation, mass emancipation from a plantation, and those people are sent to Liberia, the documentation is more clear. Whenever it's a missionary, an educated African American who is a missionary, or someone like an E.J. Roy, the records are very clear. The records on recaptured Africans and other marginalized people is not as clear. So this one of the ways that I'm trying to distinguish between recaptured Africans and actual African Americans is by tracing the records and seeing how far I can go. If I can find records of them prior to, the parents, those being on board, can we find out if they were liberated from a certain plantation? As we could do with the mother of Joseph Jenkins Roberts, as we could do with E.J. Roy. Not that he was liberated, but we could go back to his birthplace. We knew who his parents were, what his father did. In the case of recaptured Africans, it's usually very fuzzy. They don't really have a lot of information. And they usually are sent back. They're always calculated in the record as being born free, but beyond that, it's ambiguous. So typically, that's a clue leading to their origin not being of African American descent. But again, this is inconclusive. I'm just going to give you what I found. Charleston, South Carolina municipal census of 1820 says that they were, at the time that the census was done in the year 1820, which was 5 years before the birth of James S. Smith, there were 10,655 white residents of Charleston, people that were of European descent. So European Americans, 10,655. Enslaved African Americans, enslaved Americans of African descent, 12,652. Wow. And this is not the state. This is just the city of Charleston. So what I want to point out about Charleston is in 1820, Charleston, South Carolina was a city, an urban city that had the highest population of enslaved people of any urban city in the United States. Most enslaved people were enslaved in rural areas, but Charleston had the highest population of enslaved people living in urban areas.
I wonder
why Charleston is a city with all of these slaves. There's no plantation because it's a city. So these slaves, these enslaved Africans, are living within the city limits. These people are doing work, dock work, they're doing other industrial labor, because this is an urban setting. So the type of work that these enslaved people are doing is much different from what they'd be doing on a plantation in rural South Carolina or in Mississippi or rural Georgia, for example. So that's very important to note. And then you have an urban area and you have a population of enslaved people, which is greater than the population of those holding them in bondage.
Right.
And then, which is odd because, again, this is not a plantation setting. This is Charleston. And then the free, what the census refers to as free blacks, it was 1,475 in the 1820 census. And most of them were either what they considered to be mulatto, which is a mixed ancestry, European and African, or they were liberated Africans, meaning Africans who had been liberated from slave ships and not resold into slavery, but allowed to live semi-free, right? Because you don't really have rights, but you're not the property of anyone. So that 1,475 people is the population from which James S. Smith and his family came from. Wow. And that population of people was not living like how we talked about Joseph Jenkins Roberts or E.J. Roy or others had been living in either Virginia or the northern states, where they were being prosperous and finding things to do. Right. These people were living basically a life of torment, being forced to do really hard work and often not being compensated anywhere near appropriately for the work that they were doing. So their life was very difficult. The life of a freeman in South Carolina, the life of a freeman in Charleston specifically, was not a good life. It was not a productive life. It was a very degrading existence. And most of them were teetering on the side of homelessness almost.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's profound.
So Liberia, with all of the bad news coming about people being killed by anti-abolitionist forces and people that didn't want to see another free town on the coast, with all of these rumors coming, these people are now, it still looks better to go to Liberia than to remain in Charleston as a free man of color, especially if you were not mulatto, especially if you would have been a recaptured African who's trying to reestablish life in this type of environment as a full-blooded African person. It would have been extremely, extremely difficult for them.
And so we see the census here.
So this particular document that I have here, again, it's it's not really a census, it's really
Right,
a roll of immigrants,
right.
a record of
The
immigrants
ship
from,
record.
right, it's a record of immigrants, and this is particularly on the ship Hercules. And so on the ship Hercules, you have Carolus Smith, who they presume to be about 40 years old. So this is interesting. This is a man from Charlotte, says his profession is farming. It's another clue of his origin. I'm not Charlotte, I'm sorry, from Charleston. Yeah. And his, again, farmer, that's another common profession that they gave to recaptured Africans, except for where you were tied to a plantation and you were linked to a plantation. In this case, this family, we were not able to show that they're linked to a plantation. I wasn't able to show that they're linked to a plantation. You've got Catherine, who was about 36, they presumed. You've got Mary, who was about 15, presumably James's sister, and Catherine and Carolus are presumed to be his mother and father. Robert McKinney was not part of the Smith family. I don't know why he's included in their group on the census, but he was about 14. It could be that they had taken him in. Maybe he was all alone. And then you've got Margaret, who was 13. You have Anne, 10. You have James himself. This is President James Skivring Smith, 8 years old. His sister Dorothy. And then you have another Catherine, who's presumed to be the daughter of the other Catherine, who's 4. And then you have Carolus, who was 2. So you've got Catherine and Carolus, named after the older 2, 4 and 2 years old. And you've got, James being 8. So everyone always says that he, this is the family that he was born into, supposedly.
And I like the extent of the education. Carolus could write,
Mm-hmm.
and Robert spells.
Well, Robert McKinney wasn't necessarily a child of Carolus or a
Right,
relative. Mm-hmm.
right. But it's just interesting that he could spell some words, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
this,
one of the, go ahead.
no, and this other one to say do. What does that mean?
Do just means same as above.
Oh, okay.
So, which I'm not showing the original, but it says state or place. It's going to say South Carolina above there. So they're all from South Carolina. Were they born free? The answer is yes. And, same as above, all of them were born free. So now it says here that Catherine and Mary basically were seamstresses. These are specialized dressmakers who fit clothing to, people. This is before you had this mass production of clothing. People would be seamstresses. If you wanted a dress sewn, they go in. So they were skilled in making clothing, and basically they were seamstresses. So Mary, who was 15, and Catherine both had a profession that they were going to Liberia with a skill where they could make clothes. And then Carolus could farm.
Wow.
I have these red arrows to show people who died immediately upon their arrival in Liberia. So they arrived in Liberia ill. We talked about consumption, which was basically typhoid, and I'm sorry, not typhoid, but tuberculosis. And we talked about malaria. So they probably died of TB. It was very common for tuberculosis to be spread on the ships. By the time they arrived, they would have this, terrible advanced stage of TB. And unfortunately, both of his parents and Mary and Margaret died. All 4 of the oldest people in their family died the same year they arrived.
Wow.
So it's another terrible tragedy. So he's 8 years old. He loses his parents. He loses his older sisters, and you know how older sisters like to take care of their younger siblings.
All right.
And he's essentially, he and Anne and Dorothy and Catherine and Carolus are all alone. So you got a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, 8-year-old, and 10-year-old with no one to look after them. Well, they do end up getting absorbed and adopted.
Or I got a comment here from Kenneth Smith.
Hmm.
Kenneth, who told me he's the great 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 grandson. He said one can argue that James S. Smith was mulatto based on his bill of sale. Kenneth told me he's been digging up records. Did you find that?
There was no bill of sale for James S. Smith. He may be confusing this James S. Smith with
No,
someone
Carlos,
else.
the father. He said the father.
The father is Carolus.
Yeah, said there's a bill of sale of the father that said the father was mixed.
I haven't seen that. I would love to see it. You can share it.
Yeah.
There's a bill of sale for Carolus Smith
And
because it says Carolus Smith was born. The records say he was born free.
okay.
So I'd like to see that because that would contradict all of the other records I've seen from South Carolina. It says he was born free.
Okay, let's make progress here. Dr. James W. Loginberg, a physician with the American Colonization Society (ACS), adopted young James after his parents died. Used his influence to send James to the United States for medical training. James S. Smith was the second person of color to receive a medical degree in the United States.
Yes.
Liberian.
Yes. So when he passed away, when his parents passed away, the ACS, the American Colonization Society, the white physician who was not able to save his parents, took him in. And basically, so what would happen when children were orphaned? Different people, usually the repatriated African Americans, would take in different orphan children and bring them up as their own. In this particular case, James was basically taken in by the ACS doctor that was not able to save his parents, that pronounced his parents dead. And so James was extremely bright. He was quick. He was, a quick learner. And people were very impressed with how incredibly intelligent he was. He was then sent to the United States to go to further his studies after he finished secondary school in Liberia. And he's only the second African American to graduate from medical school in the United States. There were other African Americans that went to medical school abroad because they were not allowed to go to medical school in the US, but he was only the second one to graduate from medical school in the United States. So this is a huge thing.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. So we'll go to the next slide. So basically, this is the school he went to. He graduated from the Berkshire. I'm sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied. I need some water. The Berkshire Medical College in the year 1848. That's when he became a medical doctor. And that's a picture of the gates to Berkshire. That's what it would have looked like the year he graduated from the school, being typically the only person of color in his classes.
So this should be among most of the things that we Liberians like to take pride in, right? First, in Liberia is the first black to graduate from medical school in the United States.
The second.
Is the second. Who's the first?
Yeah. Can't remember his name. He was an African American. Can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Okay. So after getting a medical degree, Smith returned to Liberia as the ACS physician in 1849 and served in Sino and Grand Bassa counties.
Yes. So he spent a lot of time between Sino and Grand Bassa. He learned how to speak a couple of the cloud languages, what we call Bassa, what we call Kru. and so he could speak some languages, of course, to be able to also assist his patients. So he served both colonists and indigenous people in both areas, in both counties.
Thank you, Mr. Dr. Smith, for serving as signer.
So, yes. So in 1855, he was elected to the Senate of Grand Bassa County. So he was a senator in 1855. And it's interesting, in those days, the people that would be elected to the legislature were always the most educated in the society. They were always the most educated, the most influential. So the House of Representatives also, you were looking at all of the wealthy planters, the college, the professors, the teachers, the doctors, the lawyers, the judges. These are typically the people that would be elected to hold these higher offices.
Carl, what you want to say here? What you want to say about today's senator and representative, but I don't want to go there.
Yeah, this is a history show. I'm just giving context. This is the second African American to graduate from medical school in the United States, or American-born African to graduate from medical school in the United States. He returns to Liberia, his new country, his new home that he lived in since he was 8 years old, goes back home, and the people of Grand Bassa elect him to the Senate.
Right.
And then this is also very important, the second line. So from 1856 to 1860, he was Secretary of State under President Stephen Allen Benson. He was Secretary of State under President Stephen Allen Benson. This is important for two reasons. Stephen Allen Benson, who we talked about in the past, a full-blooded African, who was part of the Republican Party, was our second president. And they always talk about this great divide between the Republicans and the True Whig Party. Here we have the first True Whig Party vice president who formerly served under the Republican administration, just like the first True Whig president, Roy, also did. So this whole story that we have in Liberian history, this whole narrative that is this great divide between the True Whig and the Republicans, and how all the Republicans were mulatto and all the True Whig people were Black people, and blah, blah, blah. The records do not support that.
Right. So two things, and we know that he did not, like we have today, cross carpet, because he later became vice president and president under the True Whig Party. So serving as foreign minister under Stephen Allen Benson, he still wasn't crossing over to Benson's party. I'm just buttressing the point to say. And another thing I want to note that Smith returned to Liberia, and he was elected to the Senate representing Grand Bassa County. I would imagine if it were today when he was returning, they would petition him to be president, but no, he went to the Senate. I'm just throwing a jab there.
Well, I mean, he didn't just return, though. He didn't go into the Senate until 1855. Yeah. He had been serving as a medical doctor both in Sino and Bassa since 1848.
Right.
So it wasn't until 1855 that he became a senator. So he didn't just go back and jump into politics. He worked as a doctor for a number of years.
Thank you, James. The Senate and House of Representatives then met.
Okay, I'm sorry, Dennis, not to cut you off. I want to set this up a little bit. Yeah. So we were talking about the True Whig. We're talking about the True Whig, taking over through an election where James Smith becomes the first vice president of the True Whig Party, serving under Edward James Roy. Edward James Roy serves his term, and then the Senate and House of Representatives meet to impeach Roy. And actually, the deposing, this was really not even an impeachment. It was actually an illegal coup d'etat. It was being funded and sponsored by Joseph Jenkins Roberts. So Roberts and ACS did not want Roy in power. Roy was bad for American business, good for Liberian business. So there was this whole conspiracy to remove Roy, the British, the Americans. Nobody wanted this uppity, arrogant African man, black like tar, in E.J. Roy, standing up, erect and confident, as in all of his grandeur, ruling a country of freed Negroes during a time when African Americans were just barely crawling out of enslavement. It's right after the Civil War. Nobody wanted to see the dignity of African people. This is also at the dawn, just before the Berlin Conference. It's at the dawn of colonialism. Nobody wanted to see the grandeur of African self-governance. So this man represented everything, the antithesis to white supremacy. So they needed to get rid of him and his super black vice president, James Skivring Smith. So, I mean, you can read on your own time as much literature as you want from that time period. There's a lot of stuff available. The way that these men were described by the American investors into those Americans who invested in the ACS, which was, of course, more than a philanthropic venture. It was an economic venture for American so-called philanthropists. They were business people. And ACS was also a major exporter of goods from Liberia. They were engaged in business. So through their influence, they got the Liberian Senate and House to do the following. And you can go ahead and read. I just wanted to set that up.
Right. No, thank you. I just want to assess something that make it look like Smith was part of the TWP when he was serving. So Percy Harris, at the time he served, the TWP did not exist when he served as a Secretary of State. So that is correct.
Right. That was the whole point. Yeah. He served under the Republican Party, and so did So this whole idea that there was this great divide, they broke away. They broke away from the Republican Party. Stephen Allen Benson didn't live long enough to see the day that these men rose to create their own party. But based on his ideology and his own writings, I believe Benson would have also gone along with these men and formed True Whig. So you can go ahead, Dennis.
The Senate and House of Representatives then met in a hurriedly summoned Congress and issued a most temperately worded manifesto. In this, the sovereign people of the Republic of Liberia declared on October 26, 1871, that the President E.J. Roy was disposed from his office. The government was to be provisionally carried out by an executive committee of 3 members until constitutional measures had been taken for the election of a new president. The proclamation ended with an expression of thanks to God that this uprising had been attended with so little bloodshed. The 3 personages appointed to be members of the executive committee were Charles B. Dunbar, General R.A. Sherman, and Amos Herring. The Secretary of State, Hillary R.W. Johnson, still remained in office.
Yes. So basically, General Sherman, when you hear people talking about this whole mulatto clique, the mulatto clique wasn't really a clique of government. It was a clique of private citizens, really. So you've got Dunbar, who is at this time indistinguishable, really, in my eyes, from a European person. And you've got General Sherman, who, again, another person who is almost indistinguishable from an Irishman. These are people who were absolutely the sons of white men. And they were in Liberia. They were not serving as presidents and vice presidents and senators, but they had a lot of power. And so when they financed and orchestrated this coup as businessmen and as very powerful people, I mean, General Sherman of Cape Mount, if you go to the next slide, I have a nice picture of him so you can see what I'm talking about. So I have a photo here of two of these men. So Hillary Johnson was a true Whig. person who was retained. He ended up being president of Liberia. We're going to tell his story coming up soon. He ended up rising to become president as well. But at the time, this is what Sherman looked like. So when you hear people talking about this whole mulatto clique, they projected onto the presidents, but it wasn't really the presidents. It was the people who were powerful in the society that would not have ever been elected to president. No one would have ever elected, because you have to remember the majority of the voters in Liberia at the time were either recaptured Africans, indigenous, or Black, returnees from the United States. So you had indigenous coastal people, men, because at this time it was only males that had suffrage rights. You had recaptured African men, and you had African American men who had repatriated and become Liberian. So they were not going to form a consensus to elect a person that looked like Dunbar or Sherman at that time in history. This is why, this whole argument that these early presidents were all mulatto is not exactly correct. Roberts was, and we've been able to systematically prove that the rest of them were pretty much Black men. Until you get to, of course, Russell, but that we haven't reached Russell yet. We're right now we're on Smith. So that's what they look like. Let's see. So Smith returned to serve the remaining 2 months of Roy's term. This gets a little fishy. We go back to what you just read. They set up an interim government. They set up an interim government with Charles B. Dunbar and General Sherman and Amos Herring. These guys were the ones. They set up an interim mulatto government is what they did. They got rid of Roy, and they thought they got rid of Smith. But Smith came back, and he evoked the Constitution. And he said, hey, you said you're impeaching the president. I am supposed to serve as president if you impeach the president. What is the reason for the interim government? And that kind of temporarily subdued Roberts. And Roberts, because these guys, Dunbar, Sherman, Herring, these are Joseph Jenkins Roberts' puppets. These are his boys. This is his clique. And James Smith comes in and he puts his foot down and he says, you cannot take over the country. If you impeach Roy, I am the president. Not you, not Dunbar, not Sherman, not some interim junta. I am the president, unless you're going to admit that this was not an impeachment, that it was in fact a coup d'etat. And that is how he basically, was able to finish out the remaining 2 terms that Roy had. And during that time, Smith was really trying to position himself to be able to save Roy's life, which he was unsuccessful in doing. As we know, Roy, according to many eyewitnesses, Roy was murdered. And they said that he drowned. That's what we talked about. For E.J. Roy's story, we actually have a 4-part series. You can refer to Liberia History Channel on YouTube, and you will see part 1, 2, 3, and 4. You will get the details of Roy's death. So this is not about E.J. Roy, but I just wanted to emphasize the fact that Smith took over. Go ahead.
No, it's important you say that, because we already dealt with Roy even before we started the series. So we had 4 episodes on Roy, and so Smith coming right after Roy to complete Roy's term. So I hope our audience is following that as well.
Yes. So today I want us to have a lot of discussion. So I'm going to try to breeze through these slides as much as possible. I've been getting complaints that we don't give people enough time to call and discuss the topic, if that's okay, Dennis.
Yeah, sure.
So after, he served his 2 terms, he was, basically Joseph Jenkins Roberts then becomes president again. And through a very undemocratic process, President Roberts starts to serve as Liberia's president, 7th president. And Dr. James Skivring Smith, then returns to Buchanan. And he said, he was then elected at that time. He was elected at that time. It was elections. He became superintendent of Grand Bassa County from 1874 to 1884. So he spent 10 years as the superintendent of VASA, um, under the True Whig Party. And yeah, I mean, he served his time there well.
And Carl, this is another it's profound as well, right? Because this was the former Secretary of State, the former
Mhm.
Vice President, the former President, going back to his county to serve as superintendent for 10 years.
Yes.
Because as we discuss these things, I'm kind of trying to see a picture of what it's like now. Like even someone who served as a minister in government, going back now to serve is too big. The next stop should be the presidency. But I don't want to go there. Let's stick with Smith. And I think this was it's incredible.
Yeah. So he goes back, and all this time that he's serving as superintendent, he's still practicing medicine. So one of the things I want to also emphasize is that senators, representatives, superintendents, many of them had their professions. They were either farmers, lawyers, doctors, and they still had their private practice. So while he was superintendent, he was still serving as a doctor. At this time, he was no longer an ACS doctor. He was no longer working under the auspice of the American Colonization Society. He was in a private practice as a medical doctor. So the year that he died, many others died as well. So this is President Howard basically in his annual address to the legislature announcing the death of James Skivring Smith and others who also perished in the year 1892. I don't know if you can see that to read it, but we can send
Yeah.
it to people if you don't want to.
Let
It's
me
very small. I apologize.
let me read a little bit. I love reading.
Okay.
Uh, Gentlemen of the Senate and House of Representatives, the revolution of the year has brought us to the time prescribed by the Constitution for the executive to inform you of the condition of the nation and to recommend any measure for your consideration which he may think expedient. But before so doing, let us acknowledge with unfeigned gratitude the beneficent providence who has thus far sustained us. The year has been marked and made memorable by incidents of the most painful, solemn, and lamentable character. On the 12th day of November last, the whole country was called to part with their chief executive, Joseph James Cheeseman, who had been faithful in the service of his country and in several positions which he had filled with honor and credit to the nation as well as to himself. His death is recorded as first in the history of the nation. While chief executive, previous to his death, the country has been called to mourn the loss of Reverend James H. Deputy, one of the associate justices of the Supreme Court. Reverend E.W. Dix, ex-senator and sub-treasurer of Maryland County at the time of his death. Honorable H.A. Williams, acting secretary of the Treasury and secretary of the War and Navy, Reverend J.P.K. Valentine of Maryland County, who, while in defense of his country, was hastily summoned to the Spirit Land. Honorable Dr. James S. Smith, who had also been long in the service of his country, and in addition to these serious, painful, and heavy losses, we have been afflicted by the death of Honorable Walker Brumskin, Judge of the Court of Quarter Sections of Grand Bassa County, and who had more than once enjoyed the confidence of his fellow citizens to represent them in the legislature.
Yeah. So that this is important for a couple of reasons. One of the things that I have become fascinated with is this particular year and this whole concept of either a pandemic or some type of other issue. But there was a pandemic sweeping the country. There was a huge amount, a large amount of people who died in Liberia in 1822. It was unnatural. It was unusual. And a lot of very important thinking people lost their lives in the year 1892 to what they call consumption, which would have been tuberculosis. Now, TB had always been present. I don't know why that huge number of people would have died from consumption in that particular year. Look at the names that were called. I mean, the tragedy there. You've got, Judge Brumskin. You've got President Cheeseman, who actually died in office. You've got, former President James Skivring Smith. So he died in what I would describe as a pandemic because there were so many deaths of also ordinary citizens, and it was catastrophic. It was a catastrophic year of loss for Liberia, and so I just wanted to point that out. I've not seen anything like that for during my studies, that amount of loss of life. Um, so just wanted to point that particular thing out, especially these people who had survived TB, in their childhood, who had some resistance to it. So I'm not going to say that something else was going on. I would tell you that in 1880, we had, some people come into the country from Germany. That's a different show. We're going to talk about um, medical experiments, the history of it in Liberia, and the testing of diseases in Liberia on a different episode. That will be coming up after the presidential series. It's important to address because we do have a documented history of medical expeditions and medical testing that was done on our citizens. I'm not saying that that's necessarily what this was, but it corresponds time-wise, this pandemic coming out, shortly after some of those medical expeditions were done. So, it's supposed to say doctor. I don't know what. Oh, he's also senior. James S. Smith Senior. He passed away that year, as we just learned, and then his only biological child was James Skivring Smith Jr., who served as vice president to Howard, which is the last president we'll cover in the series.
Right, and so my buddy Kenneth Smith said James Smith Jr. was his great grandfather.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, so Kenneth is watching. So that's the last slide. Let me go to some comments here.
Okay.
Let's go to some comments talking about the interim government or so-called interim government. Percy Harris is saying Smith had left the state to await his impeachment trial for maladministration, which was to occur during the next sitting of the legislature. And so he continued because he was out of town. So, and it took days for him to get back to Monrovia, and that's why an interim government was necessary.
Yeah, I mean that I've read that. I mean, I don't think the interim government was necessary in his absence either, because the next would be the Speaker of the House. That was a coup. I mean, that's the excuse that I see in a lot of secondary sources, especially books that were written in the mid 1900s. It just doesn't add up, because the Constitution doesn't say if the vice president isn't present, you have an interim government. The Constitution then refers to the Speaker of the House. So there was no excuse for them setting up an interim government at all.
Right. Or you have, I think that time it was the Speaker or the Secretary of State who could take over. So why, if they were doing some interim government, why wasn't it one of them? Why?
Yeah, it was just Roberts, being Roberts. Roberts being Roberts. He was extremely dictatorial.
Right, just our first president. Mohammed Salia Dukley, when we're talking about Smith going back to serve in Buchanan, he said, wow, Labra is progressing, and he's laughing. This is not funny, Mohammed.
Wait, what?
No, he said Labra is progressing. Francis Ferguson is watching us from River G County, Fishtown, in the Ross Crusher community. Percy Harris was said Dunbar was the city mayor of Monrovia at the time of Roy episode, and Sherman was the head of the militia.
Yeah, he
So
was a general. Yep, exactly.
mm, it's those elected to the Senate then included people of integrity. Before I continue reading the comments, let me announce that you can call. Let me put the number on the screen. You can call and be a part of the discussion. The number is 605-313-6004. The code is 791-403 #. So call that number and be a part of the discussion. It is very important. Jimmy Eastman is asking what was the ideological difference between the Republicans and the True Whig Party? Oh, sorry, Carl.
Yeah, you have me muted. I thought you were still reading comments.
Right.
You have me muted.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, so the idea we've discussed this in previous episodes, but really, especially with EJ Roy episodes, but in a snapshot, the Republican Party was the establishment party. They were really close ties to the American investors in ACS. They wanted to protect their interests. They had a understanding, or they believed very much that they needed to um, for lack, well, it's not lack of a better term, it really is what it is. They wanted to pander to the powerful investors. You remember ACS was being controlled by the wealthy and politically powerful of the United States at the time. And they wanted to make sure that they were in their good graces in order to protect themselves and protect their semblance of sovereignty. Whereas the True Whig Party was much more radical and wanted to have complete economic sovereignty and have an economic and basically break free of the clutches of ACS, which was controlling the entire economy of Liberia in their minds. So the ideological difference between the two, one was more about self-determination, and we're Africans, we can do this on our own. That was the True Whig, and the more cautious, I'm not going to use the word conservative, but the more cautious um, uh, Republican Party, which sought the interest of those who sponsored the ACS. They felt they had to, they felt like they had their head in the lion's mouth and they needed to take it out slowly. And there was also this thing where they would come in and they would the Americans and Europeans would come in and they would gas up the heads of people like Joseph Jenkins Roberts. Oh, you're the true lords of the land. Your European ancestry. You're superior to these people. Don't allow the. And it was pathetic because some of the most brilliant people were clearly not mulatto. Some of them, it was just a mess. So you had all of this divide and conquer tactics also coming from the Europeans, and some people fell for that. But I will say that the divide was ideological. It was not a color divide because there were what they used to call mulatto people on both sides in both struggles.
Keller Vincent said, wow, Carl, you're speaking of my great grandfather. Keller, who's your great grandfather?
Probably Smith.
Okay. Darian Powerhouse, yes, Carl. Medical testing in Liberia is very important to address. Even during Mount Ellen regime, there was testing going on in Liberia that she never informed the Liberian people until the camp was discovered when Weah came to power. I didn't know this.
We'll talk about. I mean, that we're going to talk about that. I don't think. Yeah. That's not really. We had that going on until the war, really, not after the war. The medical testing facility, the tropical disease medical testing facility, they were doing it on chimpanzees.
Right.
out in Marshall. That's a different, so when we do that show, we'll talk about all of that. But they supposedly have not been testing on human beings in Liberia since the 1950s.
Let me bring in Mr. Kenneth Smith from the lineage of President Smith. Mr. Kenneth Smith, you are live. Question or comment, sir? Kenneth, are you there? All right, let's go ahead and read some more and read some more comments here. Percy, how
Yes,
is?
I was muted.
Okay, go
Yes,
go.
I'm here.
All right, go ahead, Kenneth.
Yes, James.
You got
Yes,
to turn the
Dr.
Facebook off so you can listen to us. Turn it off. What you are watching us on. Please turn it off so we can hear you clearly.
That's what I'm trying to do. Yes. Okay. Dr. Smith was my great grandfather. His son James Kevin Smith was my grandfather, and I like what you're doing. I thank you, but there are a lot of things about Dr. Smith that contradict some of these things in the history book. Like you alluded to a little bit. I think I sent John a document that from the archive of South Carolina, his bill said, and it says that he was mulatto. So the time frame which you spoke about 1,400 people, correlate with that. Okay. If you want to learn more about Dr. Smith, I will advise that we go to the archive of South Carolina in Columbus, Ohio. Columbus, South Carolina. Okay. Yes, he was a doctor. Yes, most of the stuff you said is true. But one of the questions I had, and one of the things that Liberians don't really take pride into, is that with all these great guys that were leaders in Liberia, we don't even have their graves. You know, we don't know where they were buried. We don't know any historical artifacts on them. It's so sad. Hello?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Yes. I just want to thank her for her work done. But that's why I say I sent Dennis, even his speech, Dr. Smith read to Congress. I sent it to him.
Okay.
I sent the bill of sale. I sent him the bill of sale of his other siblings, his mother, where his father, Carlos, well, back then they called him Carlos, somebody misspelled it. They say Carlos. Okay? So we do have a bill of sale for even James. You know, I sent it to Dennis so he can share it with you. And I think it's a good series you guys doing, and we can document all these things for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth.
Yes.
Call?
Yes. So no more callers?
Yeah, that's all the callers we have, and then we can go back to the comments. If you don't have any response, we can go back to the comments.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see those, and that's the good thing about these shows. So I don't have the capacity to look at every possible, document, but I did look through the census papers. And every document, even the ship manifest, has them listed as being born free. So if that is, if there are bills of sale for them and they were born free, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And it needs to be corrected, because even the primary source records have them as being born free per their own statement. Because anytime someone was born in captivity and liberated for the purpose of being sent to Liberia, that would be documented.
Yeah. So according to what he sent me, this is he said Secretary of Department of Archives and History Record, Peter Carlos Smith, bill of sale, a mulatto slave named James, about 12 months old. This is what. This is what.
Yeah, so that's not really how. Okay, so this is not really how history works. You're talking about 1825, and these look like digital records. Yeah, this is not consistent with who this is. This is probably someone else. What I would advise that we do in some of these situations is look at have an actual archivist or an actual historian do a match between this kind of data and the actual data that's connected to the president himself. So the record detail is 1825. He was born around that time. Can you put the record back up for me, Dennis? I wanted to point out a couple of discrepancies I'm just seeing off the top of my head.
Okay.
So there's just a couple little discrepancies, but I would love to examine it and then we can come back to it. But it's not necessarily, we're not necessarily looking at records for the same person. Yeah. So you're having a mulatto named James, about 12 months old. So if he's mulatto, he's being born to a Black woman, not to a white woman. So the father, if he's mulatto, the father could not have been Black. And James, his father, was African. He was Black. So James himself, if you look at his photograph, he clearly was not mulatto. He was photographed around 1853 by Augustus Washington. So there's just too many inconsistencies, and I'm sorry that that this is coming out like this, but this can't possibly be the same person. I'm not seeing how this is the same person.
Right.
And the name Smith, just so that we are clear here, if you look at slave records from South Carolina, the name Smith is just common, very, very common. There's if you're just looking at name alone, you'll see so many James Smiths in the slavery record. But looking at enslaved people, when you have people who are born free, you're supposed to be looking at records of people who were born free. And it's, James clearly was not, yeah. Let's just change the subject. This is something that needs to be examined a bit further.
Okay, because what it's saying here is this is Peter Smith to Carlos Smith of James Smith. So just looking at the description, does this mean that Peter Smith is selling James Smith to Carlos Smith? Is that what that is? It's a Smith Peter to Carlos Smith, bill of sale for a mulatto slave named James.
Who was 12 months old, right? So anytime you're selling a slave that's mulatto, you have to always remember in the South, whenever there was a mulatto child, it was a Black mother and a white father. So they're selling a child to probably the biological father, is what it looks like to me. But we'll have to, this is something I can easily research and get back to him on about his ancestor. I can help him with that. I can work with you on this if you'd like, and we can try to get to the bottom of it.
Thank you. Let's go back to more comments here. We have Anna Otimo, says call love and light from Tokyo, Japan. Thank you for being a beacon of hope for the future of our children. Thank you, Anna. Percy Harris again, no call is wrong. The Secretary of State was next in line and not the speaker.
Right.
At the time, John Lewis would have taken over, but he too was impeached and had to pay $11. And
the whole thing was a coup. But if you watch it, the James, yeah, it was a coup. They were just looking for. He just wanted to take over because they were hurting the revenue for the American investors.
This one from Junior Tikwa. Our Liberian history matter. We accept our first independent date, but also we had a second independent, which the native did not form America, which the native did not from America, but by force, and our main history with our government staff. I'm not clear on this, Junior.
Yeah, that person's a troll. Don't read any more of his comments. The person's not even listening to the program. They came to teach. They came to teach whatever's in their head.
Francis Wilson said, graveyard cough, GYC, Liberia's name for tuberculosis, because that's where you end up. Testing goes on until today on African children. All right.
Yeah, for me, the presentation I wanted to do was just based on what these medical colleges documented that they were doing, not what we think they were doing, but what they actually claim and take responsibility for doing. So I'm not getting into the whole gray area of conspiracy. I'm going to address what is documented when we do get to that point.
D. Hagman Staple, I'm watching live from Redwood City, Grand Jita County this morning. Sheikh Kafumba Dukle, James Smith got his formal medical education in the U.S. He later became the physician of the ACS. He was later elected to the Senate before becoming Roy's running mate. We all know what happened to Roy. After Jimmy's stint as the Liberian presidency, he was a superintendent of Grand Bassa. His son, Jimmy Jr., also served as a superintendent of Grand Bassa and later as a vice president. Okay. Vivian Power say nothing I knew about this president until listening to FOL. So thank you. Those are a few of the comments, Carl. So you can go ahead if you have any comment.
You keep muting me, Dennis.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, I think those comments were pretty productive. I'd like to, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into Smith. I didn't have an opportunity to receive something that I requested. When it comes in, I will give it to you so you can publish on your page, Dennis. But based on what I've seen, I am convinced that that they were born free, as the ACS records indicate, until someone can show me, unquestionable documentation otherwise. That's what I've seen.
Thank you. And if you're still there and want to join the conversation, please don't hesitate to call the number there. Please call the number on the screen. We don't have a caller yet, but that's the number on the screen.
All right. So basically, one of the things I wanted to also point out that's incredibly important when we're talking about this whole concept that all of these people were mulatto, all of these people were mixed, we really have to go back and do their genealogy and look at their history. And also look at what was written about them at the time that they were alive. It was very common for people to describe people by their ethnic background because people were extremely racialized in the 19th century. If someone was, they referred to people as full-blooded African or full-blooded Negro all the time. They referred to people as mulatto or quadroon all the time. So people's ethnicity, their ethnic makeup, or what they call their racial makeup, was always part of the biographical or even political description. So when you go back to the primary source documents, excuse me, it's a very good place to start. We did the episode on James Briggs Payne. I had only ever seen the 1952 sketch of President Payne, and so I started digging into his background. And to my surprise, he was not even mixed. He was also described as a full-blooded African, and you go back and you start looking at the records, and it's like, why did we think that he was light-skinned? Because in 1952, they sketched him that way for a stamp collection. So it is important to realize that we did have some, leaders who had white fathers, like President Russell, like President Roberts, who was inaccurately described also as an octoroon by many later historians. When you go back to the records in Virginia, he clearly was not an octoroon. And even just looking at his photographs that were taken by Augustus Washington, his hair texture, no octoroon has nappy hair. It's just not possible. He was a light-skinned mulatto guy, and he was in no way, shape, or form an octoroon, with hair coarser than that of President Sirleaf. It's not possible for you to be 1/8 black and be that black. So it is important for us to always try to go back to the sources. The purpose of this show is just to share what I've found so far. I do not know everything. I have not read everything, but the information that I have read, I'd like to share it and hopefully spark a different way of thinking about our history and maybe some more interest so others can also join me in doing research. So if you find more documentation, if you find more archival sources that either I can't afford right now or that I haven't accessed, please bring that out and share it. This is not the knowledge of our history. Most of this stuff is housed in libraries. It's free access, public domain. You just need to make appointments, go, and you can access archives for little of nothing. There's a lot of things that have been digitized. We're still working. The Liberia History Guild's working to digitize more things. And things have already been digitized by a lot of libraries and institutions as well. So this is the information age. Even if you have to take a trip to your local university library, I'm fortunate to be in Atlanta. There's a wealth of information here at Clark Atlanta. And I have a friend that's in New York that has access to the New York Public Library, the Smithsonian. There's a lot of our history in these institutions. Some of it has been digitized, most of it has not. But let's work together and dig this stuff up. It's the responsibility of all of us to put hands together as scholars, people who've been trained in research, to bring the information forward. Because it's clear to me that many of these things have been intentionally skewed. The narrative has been intentionally skewed. This is not an accident. Some of this is not an accident.
Right. And talking about records, Smith, our friend Kenneth Smith had the bill of sale of I think the wife or somebody, and he also sharing with us the house of his son, Edina, Grand Bassa County. But we have callers on the line. Let's start with our good friend Elvis Morris. Elvis, you're alive. And by the way, Elvis is watching us on the big screen from his home. So if you are watching on the
Elvis, you caught my mouth open. You couldn't take my picture with my mouth closed.
Elvis, go ahead. You're alive.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, I was calling again, Justin. I didn't have too much to add, but just to appreciate Ms. Call for her time and her continuous effort on the platform and bringing this presentation to us. Another thing I wanted to say, and it's just my observation, I think looking at people who picture are in black and white, it would be hard to really tell the true complexion, just looking at it. Like, for example, I think E.J. Roy and I think Skivring, we can tell it's, actually quite dark, just that picture. But some of those guys who we see, they may have some quote unquote Negro features, but if they were in color, perhaps their skin would be a lot lighter than the people, the contemporaries, during that time. So yeah, you said maybe they don't look mulatto in terms of their hair texture and stuff, but maybe they were quite high yellow, maybe in that time, or quite light skinned, even though they had, quote unquote Negro features. So I don't know. Maybe it's just my observation because I don't think we can get a clear picture of their skin tone or their skin.
Yeah. So Elvis, let me just interject for a second. Elvis, so I'm not just going off of photos. If you watch any of this, I also look at how they were described when they were alive. And with Daniel Bashiel Warner, for example, there's multiple primary sources, people who knew him and interacted with him, who wrote that he was a full-blooded African, including Edward Wilmot Blyden, ACS records, church Episcopal Church records. So it's not just his photograph, but also what was said about it. At no time, the only presidents that were ever described as mulatto were Russell and Roberts by their contemporaries. That is important. And that kind of took me aback. So I started looking at it. So I didn't go into this thinking that these people were not mulatto. I grew up thinking they were mulatto. I grew up listening to the same stuff everybody else grew up listening to. So I don't have I didn't have some, I grew up learning that all of the early presidents until E.J. Roy, actually, no, I didn't grow up learning that, but I did learn that many of the early presidents were mixed. And so when you do research, the first thing you do is you suspend your disbelief. You have to look at what you're looking at for what it is. And I think the problem a lot of people have is when they have information in their heads, they try to validate it instead of seeing things for what they are. So if you're convinced that these guys were mulatto, even if you read somebody saying they're not, you're going to say, well, why were they saying that? Oh, they were just racist. They were just trying to say they weren't mulatto. Why would they do that? It's not rational. It's not logical.
Let me give a
Thank you. Because we got a couple of more callers. So go ahead quickly.
Just 1 second, one second, Mr. John. I would say this, like again, living in Liberia, right? A lot of not all of them, but a lot of these families that we know, most of them even today they're still, lighter skin,
right?
Like the Ades, the Uris,
Well, the Uris were mulattoes. They're documented mulattoes. They came in this country. The father liberated his biological children, gave them a lot of money, a lot of resources, and sent them to Liberia. So they're mulattoes. The Shermans are mulattoes. The Dunbars. There's a lot of mixed race people. We're talking about the presidents.
All right.
Okay, I'll leave it there, Ms. Carr. You can elaborate later. I'll get up the line.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's just the whole thing is we're confusing things. We're not saying that people weren't mulatto. There are a lot of mulattoes that were sent to Liberia. There were a lot of native people that were having children with white people. I mean, there's a lot of native people that had kids with Germans and Portuguese and French. I mean, a lot of mixed race people were in Liberia. That is not the point of the discussion. The point of the discussion is we're looking at presidents here and who these presidents were.
Thank you. Let's bring in Percy Harris. Percy, you're live.
Hey, Dennis. How you doing? Cool. How you doing?
Hey.
I called specifically to commend you guys. You guys, I mean, these videos, you will not appreciate them now. It will help several generations of our people to rectify the miseducation that has happened in our country, especially for those of us that grew up going to school in Liberia and what we have come to know to be factual, right? What we claim to know to have been factual. This program is just abusing a lot of that misinformation, especially for somebody like me. Take the pin portrait that was I've never seen that before. I've never seen that anywhere before. That was like a discovery of all my life. I was being to be
white.
That's what I've read. That's what I know. But then when you look at his grandson, Bacchus Matthew, because James Springsteen is Bacchus Matthew's his grandson, rather. Bacchus is not anything mulatto looking, right? So they call into question some of these things that we know and these pictures that we have been educated to think that we hold to be true in our mind. So I just want to commend you. This is not just for
the people watching today. I think my children will come back here and watch this video and this presentation and come away with very good education. I want to commend you guys for that and tell you thank you that you're doing a great job. On my spare time, I do log on here to watch the past shows just to see what's new and what I don't know to educate myself and whatnot. And I just want to say thank you. I nothing more. I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. You got our support whenever you need it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Percy. That was great. And this is the thing. I mean, I've read some stuff Percy's written. There's a lot of Liberian people, young people who have a passion for our history and that are doing their own research and studying, scholars like himself. And I think, you all should feel free to reach out to Dennis if you want to work on one of the presidents as well. Let him know, and we can, collaborate and do a presentation on one of the presidents or two of them or whatever it is you're interested in, because it is a lot of work. It takes a lot of time to do this digging, and it's very time consuming. But
and that's why I thank for that, because to take your time, because I do this, but I do it on a part-time basis. And what I'm actually looking at the economic part of this whole war thing, right? I'm trying to understand the economic forces that was beneath the surface of this whole deposition.
Yes.
And it's fascinating the things you learn when you dig deeper beneath the surface. So, but that's another time we'll probably collaborate on bringing that to the people. But yeah, I'm still doing my research on that. But thank you. You're doing a great job. Keep doing that. There's a lot of people learning out here. They might not be as vocal as some of us, but there's a lot of people, old people that are learning out here, right? People don't understand that Liberian, especially Liberian identity, has been very fluid over the years. I'm going to give you a quick stuff before I leave today. Today I spoke to my old man, right? And I have a sister. When you see my sister, she's very bright, but I'm black, right? I never understood why my sister was bright. My mom is not very, she's light, but she's still not very bright. So when I spoke to my dad today, he told me that on his father's side, his father is his grandfather on his father's side is a German man, and his grandmom is a Bata woman from Riverside. I never knew that. I never understood that. But it explained the coloration of my sister to me today, just by that instant. So you learn every day. These are things you learn from your people. We all should ask our people these questions, and we got the answer to it. But every day you learn something new. But thank you again, Dennis. Thank you for what you guys are doing. Great job. And I'm still following.
Thank you, Professor. River says, Proceed Call, what is your overall view of the ACS? Do you think they were a racist organization or meant to reconcile free Black people and resettle them into our native country? Don't answer that, because I have River says Pro on the line. Make sure River says Pro, Abraham Vinton, aka River says Professional.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, my man. River put my name brand, and I like it. But yeah, Dennis, that was one of my questions. And my second question, thank you very much for the show. I came late. I always like to listen to Professor Cole. Very educated. Thank you for the show. Yeah, that was my first question. My second one is, Cisco, why do we have to grapple with this identity crisis? This idea of skin color? Why in the United States, the American men look at their forefather, they look at George Washington, they know he was white, he was American. They look at Thomas Jefferson, they know he was white, he was American. Mali look at Sundiata Keita, they know he was dark skin. They look at Mensa Kanka Musa. Why us Liberian? Why do I have to prove history? And they say Joseph Jacob Robert was white, and one day I found out after I got gray hair now, and I found out, hold on, this man was not white, he was black. Why are we struggling with this? I mean, what is the soul? Why are they doing this to us? Or what did they do it to us? Like, that we're still struggling. Like today, I see a lot of color still coming out and disputing this was white and this was black. For why we have to go through this stress, this trauma? Why are we going through this as Liberians? And that's my second question. And the first one, Dennis already read it. Because the ACS, going to school, we understand that there was this little nice organization that was meant to resettle Black people. But later on, I started getting that they were not as gentle, not like they want to do refugee
ships, a boat that took us to Nigeria. They actually didn't want us in America, so they were finding place to dump us. So please elaborate your view on the ACS, and that is the second question. Thank you very much. I'm still listening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Much of this I've answered in previous episodes, so I'll be brief. You have to, follow the first 3 episodes of the History
Yeah.
Channel address ACS and their motives very thoroughly. But ACS was, they didn't believe in the equality of African people and European people. Most of the world by the 19th century, by the 1800s, had adopted very thoroughly this ideology of white supremacy. And so there's a totem pole of humanity that they created with Western Europeans at the pinnacle, the top of it, and Black Africans at the bottom, and everyone making a progressive ascension as they get closer to white. And so cultural assimilation, meaning you become Christian, and you culturally adopt the behavior of Europeans, you are more acceptable. If your skin's lighter, you're more acceptable, etc. That's how it was. And that's how it, in some many ways, it still is to this day. But, the painting of Liberian presidents in 1952 and projecting them as European looking, or presenting them as if they had white fathers, this was deliberate. You're talking about a time when African countries were trying to break the chains of colonialism. In Africa and in the Caribbean, you had these struggles for liberation of Black people. So the narrative that had began after the Berlin Conference in the 1880s, all the way into the 1950s, the narrative was, the reason Ethiopia is not colonized is because Ethiopia is being controlled by these Amharic people. They're not really Black like you. These Amharic people, we will call them white Africans. And they, there are Black people in Ethiopia, but they are being subjugated by the Amharic people who are superior to you. And then it was said, but look at Liberia. Liberia is being run by the former sons of enslaved people. And they said, no. Liberia was controlled by the sons of white men. And the rest of the people in that country are being stepped on by the sons of white men. And therefore, you Black Africans, shut up and take your place in the world as being subjugated by we great Europeans. So this was a ideological information war to break the spirit of Black people and make them feel that they were not capable of doing things that men do, of doing things that human beings do, and being able to determine their own destiny. And it goes further, even the types of missionaries that were sent to Africa after the U.S. Civil War from the United States. Most of the missionaries before the U.S. Civil War were African American or missionaries from northern states. Most of them were Black. After the U.S. Civil War, when we start looking at the late 1800s, early 1900s, they start bringing missionaries from the Confederate South, the defeated Confederate Army, defeated Confederate South, very racist South. They're sending now missionaries to Liberia. And those missionaries are going to places like Sino, they're going to places like Harper, and they're setting up schools, and they're helping to design curriculum. And they're painting a picture of Jesus that looks like he's from Europe. And they're teaching little Black children that you are not as good as we are. And they're creating this consciousness in us that created a sort of an inferiority complex. And so when somebody, comes along way 1952 and paints E.J. Roy as a white man, or paints this other person as a white or light-skinned man, nobody questions it. In fact, they take pride in it. Oh, our forefathers had white blood, because we have become so brainwashed. And they don't want a little boy growing up in Rivercess, in Cestos, or in Ganta, or in Buchanan, or in Marshall, or Robertsport, that looks like me, a little girl who looks like me, to see a president that looks like her father from the 1800s. Because that will mean that you will develop the audacity to know that you can determine things for yourself, that you don't have to be a beggar, that you don't have to be subordinate to other people. This is why, in this country, in the United States in 2022, they always have this phrase now that's running around, representation matters. You have to show people, Black doctors, you have to show little Black kids, Black this. In Liberia, we had that. And they erased it. They buried these people. I mean, what an insult that when you see a $5 bill, if you know nothing else of E.J. Roy, you see the $5 bill in Liberia, you're looking at a man that looks Portuguese. And if you can't read and write, you want market woman. They said that our white president here, E.J. Roy. That's what they've done. And we just live with that. And we don't know the deep psychological impact that has on our self-esteem as a country. And when you think that your country was established by people who don't look like you, who don't reflect you, you will begin to hate the country. And I mean, I have a very deep belief that much of what led to even our war, our coup, was this disinformation campaign. Because people didn't see themselves as part of the country, this false indoctrination, creating an environment and a narrative that was not even true. And so here we are. What are we going to do? What is this generation going to do? We're going to resurrect the truth. We're going to put it on the table and everybody look at it for themselves.
Thank you. And Kevin also sent me a picture. I think this is Smith, Dr. Smith. Kevin, is that it? I mean, not Kevin, Kenneth. So thank you, Carl. Trying to get some comments there. Dylan said, thank you. We'll watch it when we get home. So thank you. And let's wrap it up.
Yeah, so is there no more comments, no more calls?
No more calls.
Okay, wonderful. So basically, we're going to do we're going to do Roy and Payne. We're going to do the second presidencies of Roy and Payne, and we're going to put them together next week, if that's okay, Dennis.
Is it Roy? Roberts?
I mean, Roberts. Did I say Roy? Oh my gosh. I'm getting tired. Roberts and Payne, we're going to put them together because, as you all know, they
served twice.
Yeah, they both served twice.
Yeah.
And honestly, we're going to talk about this too and how they really succeeded in the coup. Because Smith really only served for 2 months, and then they came in and did what they intended to do all along. And Roy remained in office until he died. But we're not going to.
Roberts. You're still saying Roy.
I keep saying Roy. Roberts. Joseph Jenkins Roberts remained in office until he died his second term. We're going to talk about what he did. I want to focus on Robert's second term. I don't want to vilify him. I want to tell a complete story of him. I have my personal opinions, but what I'm going to present is what he actually did, what he accomplished. Because all the way I'm describing him as a dictator, he still was able to do some pretty incredible things his second term. And that is what we're going to talk about as well. So people say, oh, you don't like J.J. Roberts. You like J.J. Roberts. He's not my favorite president of Liberia, right? He's not my favorite president in history. I think he was a pretty mean-spirited guy, but he did some incredible things, and we're going to talk about that as well. And so don't take my personal feelings for Roy. I'll try to keep them off of the I'll try to keep them off of the table and just focus on what he did his second presidency. And then we'll get into Payne as well. But again, there's zero primary source evidence that James Brooks Payne was mulatto at all. There's no evidence of that. And then the other thing I want to tell you guys is it is important that we correct these pictures. Right. In these textbooks. It's important that what we're presenting is corroborated by our gatekeepers of history and that they fix it. It is important.
Thank you. Let me read one or two more comments here. And okay, Francis Wilson said they called them missionaries or Peace Corps that we later learned was CIA. Yes, Carl, I know you suspect I'm a conspiracy theorist. I'm not, but time is right. And Francis
I didn't say so. I didn't say so.
Miss Francis also asking all of you to contribute to the History Channel. It's tax deductible, and thank you so much. If you like what we do here, please contribute to the Liberia History Channel. Research is not cheap, and so please, all that you can do. You see, are you imitating Prof. Call?
That Mohammed,
All
that
right.
prof name will not stick on you.
let me bring Smith. He sent me 2 pictures. I think that's what he's talking about.
Okay.
Kenneth, you are here. What I mean is you sent me these 2 pictures, this one and this one. But normally, Kenneth, we don't put our pictures on the screen like this. We kind of prepare them so that they can fit the screen. But go ahead, your live, sir.
Okay, the first picture you just put out is his junior, his son.
Okay.
The word call is saying I have my doubts also because the 2 other pictures are sent to you, no, not this one.
That one is a doctored up picture of the original. We have the original picture in the original slideshow. The second picture isn't correct.
Picture, yeah. This picture, yeah, contradicts. No, not this one. The original picture that Carl had. Plus the one, it contradicts each other. If you look at one that he's at his desk with a pen and look at the last picture I showed to you, the
last picture looks like it's been altered digitally. This is the actual picture at the Library of Congress. This is the actual picture that was taken by Augustus Washington.
Yes, but if you look at the last picture I sent to him that was in a book, a history book, and it said that was him, I raised the flag. I said, those are 2 different people.
No, you know what it is? It's an artist rendition of the original. It's not 2 different people. What they used to do, so that picture it looks to me to be a copy or an imitation of the first picture. If you look at how his tie looks, it looks like a digital history of the first picture. Like this is how they whiten people and stuff. So if you look at the picture that I presented, which is the original that was taken by Augustus Washington, the one where he's holding the pen, if you were to crop that picture and digitally remaster it, it would look like the picture on the left. Look at the ascot around his neck.
So Smith, go ahead. What's the? Let me hear you. I'm still not following.
No, what I'm saying, I support her theory that they were trying to make some of these guys white. If you look at the one on his left, he got curly hair, then the hair is pulled back. If you look at the picture on the right, that guy got Liberian kinky hair.
You know? Yeah, African hair.
Oh.
You know?
And you see how they made his eyebrows all thick? It's just weird looking.
Yeah, that's a drawing, right? The one on the left is a drawing.
It looks like it's a sketch based on this. So what they did a lot of times, and I don't know why they did it, they would sketch the photographs and try to beautify them or Europeanize them a little bit. This one wasn't done as badly as some of the other ones. But yeah.
But normally, even before you get on TV or the American TV or white TV, they kind of paint you, you know. So it's not uncommon to make you fit.
I mean, they didn't do that. So 1952, when they did that, it didn't whiten Tubman. He was president when they whitened the dead presidents, right? They didn't whiten Tubman, so they knew what they were doing. They didn't whiten Tubman. Doe isn't a white man on the currency. Tubman isn't a white man on the currency. They did it to the presidents that had been dead for a very long time.
Yeah.
They knew not to make Doe a white man because we know what he looked like. They knew not to do it to Tubman because he was alive. He was president in 1952. They made him look like a black man as he was. It was the dead presidents that they whitened. Even Roberts, they even whitened him more than he was. So, you know, so what Mr. Smith is saying is correct. They knew better. Because the same person who made those stamps also made a Tubman stamp, and the Tubman stamp looks like a black man. So it's not that he didn't know how to draw black people.
Thank you. On that note, what's your closing comment so we can draw down the curtain?
So my closing comments is this is a journey. I never know what I'm going to find, though I have a general understanding of our presidents. This process has given me a deeper understanding because I've had to dig deeper in order to present to you. And I want you all to know I'm going to continue to do that. Please keep following the channel. Support it as much as you can. If you have anything to contribute, please share that with us ahead of time. I am doing the best that I can. Like I said, do not believe that this is all there is. There's a lot more to learn. I'm only sharing what I have uncovered. There's going to be more information that we can all uncover together. If you're interested in getting any of these sources, let me know. I can share them with you if they're digitized, or I can take snapshots with my phone as I've done and shared with people as well for actual books and articles that I have. So I appreciate you guys for following. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of you for always following Focus on Liberia. We'll do our best to bring you the best. Until then, we close with our song that says, "We are all Liberian." Have a good night and God bless.
We are Liberian. Liberia is our home.